Hello and welcome to Absolute Trust Talk. I am Kirsten Howe and I'm the host today. We at Absolute Trust Council have a lot of clients who have spent or will spend time in a skilled nursing facility. That's the official legal term for what we usually call a nursing home. This might be temporary. A lot of people make a stop at a nursing home for a rehab after being in the hospital, but not being quite ready to go home yet. Or it might be more permanent. Some of our clients need a higher level of long-term care than can be provided at home or in assisted living. And these nursing homes or skilled nursing facilities can vary greatly in the quality of the care they deliver for a variety of reasons. And I thought it would be helpful to our listeners to have a conversation about what they can do to make sure their loved ones or they themselves receive quality care in a nursing home, which is why I've invited my guest, Shahrad Milanfar, to join me today. Shahrad Milanfar is a trial attorney and a mediator. He has focused his career on catastrophic personal injury, product liability, nursing home abuse, police brutality, and truck accident cases. At heart, he is a storyteller. He takes great pride in becoming his client's voice during the litigation and trial. He decided to become an attorney. This is an interesting story, to help others because he himself was a victim of a crime at the age of 12. And he had to go through the whole process. He went to court to testify against the people who had committed that crime. And when he saw how the prosecutor really protected him and took care of him, he decided that he wanted to become a trial attorney to help his clients. And so he has since spent his professional career building the skills needed to be an effective advocate for his clients. Shahrad is also an experienced mediator. He has effectively mediated over 115 cases involving a wide variety of issues: personal injury, product liability, family, guardianship, property, business, and community disputes. And also, he has taught other people to do what he does. He was an adjunct professor at Golden Gate University School of Law, teaching trial skills for 14 years. Shahrad has also taught mediation skills to attorneys and mediators, human resource professionals, psychologists. He has, I'm going to say he's also a proud board member of Bay Area Legal Aid and has been selected as a super lawyer in 2022, and he made the National Trial Lawyers Top 100, very impressive, for 2022 and 23. So very qualified, very talented. We are very, very honored to have you here, Shahrad. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to spend some time and talk about these important issues with you.
Well, thank you. I'm really looking forward to it. So let's start. You are a personal injury lawyer. So when a case of nursing home neglect or abuse comes to you, it's because someone has suffered an injury of some kind. What are some of the common types of injuries that are seen in these nursing home cases?
So a lot of times we see essentially the issues arise in either residential care facilities or skilled nursing facilities. And there's a lot of different things that can go wrong while people are there. And a lot of common issues are repeated falls, bed sores, malnutrition, dehydration, and things like sexual abuse. We have a case where the nursing home didn't have a proper evacuation plan, and they actually lost the individual for a period of time. They weren't really keeping track of where she was. So those are important things to keep in mind when you're looking at different nursing homes and when you have a loved one in those facilities, whether it's a skilled nursing facility or a residential care facility.
Sure. Okay. So for you listed 5 or maybe 6 different types of problems that you see in these cases. Can you talk to us about, in each case, What is it that the facility might be doing wrong? Say, for example, in the repeated falling.
So when you look at a lot of these problems, the important thing to look at is a lot of times it's not an isolated incident. It develops over time. So when we see falls, a lot of times, there are times where it's one fall that's a really catastrophic fall, and it happens because of various things that weren't done or could have been done. However, we have one case right now in a 12-month period. The person fell 23 times while they were in the care of this particular facility. So what's important is for the families to obviously be engaged, but also um, with falls, there have to be fall prevention protocols in place. They have to assess their fall risk. All of those things are important because they minimize or eliminate the chance of the person falling while they're in the care of this facility, and they're required to have the proper protocol in place. But protocols are great as long as you have enough people to implement them, right? So, I always, tell my kids, having a plan is great, but if you sit around on the couch, nothing happens. So when the chart says this person is a high fall risk, what did they do to prevent that? And when they have their first fall, is there a reassessment to say, what did we do and how could we have prevented this? So that additional protocols are in place for the next time it doesn't occur.
Okay. So every case is different, of course. What is the proper fall prevention protocol for one patient might be different from another, but I guess there probably are some pretty common sense things that we could think of. Make sure the floor is clear so they're not tripping over their own possessions. What about bed sores? I know that's a big issue, especially in skilled nursing.
Right. So it kind of goes back into the same type of issue, right? The facility has to have the proper protocols in place. So they have to do a skin assessment and see if this person is at a higher risk of bed sores and what protocols are in place for the staff to follow when they're actually doing their jobs of tending to the people that are in these facilities. So what's important is that staffing, the training, planning, and the documentation that has to be in these files about, all right, we assessed this particular resident. He or she is got these factors that have an increased risk for bed sores, and what are we doing? So, for instance, if the resident comes in on day one and they assess her and she has a higher risk of bed sores, what's being put in place? Does she need a special mattress? Her legs need to be elevated? And then you look at it and you say, okay, this was done at the first day, and the mattress wasn't ordered and didn't arrive until the 10th day where she's already developed bed sores. Is the person being turned every 2 hours in order to make sure that you're minimizing the opportunity for a bed sore to develop?
Okay. What about, you mentioned malnutrition and dehydration? That to me sounds like pretty basic, should be preventable, but I'm not a doctor. I don't know. What kinds of things are going wrong when that happens?
So a lot of times when somebody is in a facility and they're having a hard time eating, or maybe they're perceived as not being cooperative, a lot of times the family comes in and the tray is on the table. The food is cold 2 hours after the fact, and nobody's done anything to help this person eat, right? So the family can do a lot in terms of keeping an eye out for those sorts of things of, all right, is she eating, asking questions and being proactive. But the facility has an obligation to make sure that this person is fed, right? What's his or her weight at the time they enter the facility, and what is their weight a few days later, and why is there such a huge fluctuation in weight? That we need to know that sort of thing. I mean, we have clients in a matter of months, they've lost 25 or 30 pounds, and say, okay, well, why did that occur? So malnutrition and dehydration also increase one's risk of developing bed sores, right? So it's a compounding effect that occurs. So if they're not being fed properly, then their risk of developing bed sores could go up. And now you've got not only malnutrition or dehydration, but you potentially have bed sores that are going to add to that. And then that increases the risk of infection.
Right. That makes sense. I get that. Okay. So one thing I think probably most listeners are aware of this, that we've seen, especially since COVID, the problem industry-wide is short staffing, that there aren't enough, oftentimes there are not quite enough staff as the facility might want to have or be required to have. And I'm assuming that that's perhaps factoring into these various problems that you've talked about.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of time what happens with staffing is that they don't have enough people, and also the pay may not be uh, at a level where they can keep people, or the people that are working at these facilities maybe have 3 or 4 jobs. But the reality is the legal requirement for the care that they're supposed to provide and the safeguards that are in place hasn't changed. If the facility can't handle having 25 or 40 patients, they should cut back to 35 or 30 patients, and then you're staffed properly. So the idea is, if you're running a facility and you're looking at your bottom line, well, you can continue to build on your profits while the patients suffer, or you can still make a decent amount of money and still provide quality care for the residents that are in these facilities. But again, the families now are able to go back into these facilities, which allows them to be the eyes and ears for what's going on, when in COVID, that was not necessarily the case, which allowed a lot of bad actors to do things that are clearly illegal and frankly immoral in terms of how these residents were treated. And the one thing we all have to keep in mind, that if you have an elderly or disabled person that's in a residential care or a skilled nursing facility, those people are in a protected class under California law. So they have an obligation to make sure that they're honoring what they signed up for. And
Right.
that's something the families can help hold them honest by asking questions and being part of that.
Okay. Yeah. And you use the phrase, and I might be misquoting you, but something along the lines of bad actor. And I think mostly what you're talking about is the facilities themselves as opposed to an individual caregiver. Am I right about that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the thing that I always look at is, what is the system that's in place? Right. And usually it's not an individual who's a horrible person that decided to neglect this. It's the fact that the people who are in charge of running the facility have either put their employees in a position to fail, or outright don't care about specifics, or they perceive the resident as somebody who's difficult or somebody who is just unreasonable. And it's entirely possible that the resident is unreasonable or difficult, but the facility signs up to this for this. So the question is, if this person is so bad, then you signed up to care for them knowing this information, and what documentation do you have that you took reasonable efforts to deal with this person's needs, whether they're physical or emotional needs that they have?
Yeah. I think your point, which was maybe implied, is that the facilities, they are, for the most part, for-profit businesses. They are in the medical field, but they are trying to make money, and they don't need to make quite so much money if it means that care is being compromised. I think that's a really good point. And it kind of brings us into my next question, which is, you're saying that the family kind of needs to be aware of that fact and keep their eyes on those kinds of things. What would you say that, let's say, a family member comes to visit their loved one in a facility and suspects that something's not quite right, that the care isn't really what it should be? What would you recommend that they do?
The first thing is to ask questions, be proactive, and frankly, be respectful of the people who are working there because they're um, doing a job that hopefully is in service of your loved one. And asking questions, hey, what's going on? Why didn't she eat her food? How did this happen? How did that happen? And then if you feel that you need to document something, it's better to put it in an email because otherwise it may not exist if it's not put in the chart. So
Right.
documentation is important, that you put the facility on notice of a problem that you saw and what did they do to solve it. Ask them questions about it. Okay, what's being put in place? Mom fell yesterday. What caused the fall? What happened? And what's being done to reassess and implement different criteria or procedures for mom to not have a fall or significantly reduce the risk of that fall. So being involved, asking questions, and not accepting surface level information is important. And a lot of times we're being polite, which is great, but polite at the expense of a loved one's well-being is not necessarily the best thing. And I'm not by any means advocating being rude or disrespectful, but being persistent is important.
Okay. And I guess if it gets, to the point where it really is a problem and things are not being addressed, maybe the family needs to consider moving their family member to a different facility.
It's definitely a consideration, but it's not always an option. And
Right.
it's one of the most persistent things that we hear from the defense on these cases is, well, your clients didn't move the family member out of the place. So and the response to that I always give them is, let me get this straight. Your people were not competent and didn't live up to their legal obligation for which were paid to do. And now it's the family's fault that you didn't do your job and they should have moved mom out of the facility. When in a lot of health plans and the way these facilities work is that you need approval from somebody to move this person. So it's
Oh,
not always an option where if you have a particular health plan, you're going to say, I don't want to be here. And they say, okay, great, pick whatever place you want to go to. Uh, but it is a mantra from a lot of these facilities is, well, you should have moved it. So are you admitting that you were horrible and we should have moved her out? That's fine. I'll take that stipulation any day for a case.
yeah, that is a very good point. It's not like there are an unlimited number of places that someone could go. It's not like, well, I'm unhappy with this Starbucks, I'm going to go to the one 2 blocks away. And you oftentimes you do have to get permission from your insurance carrier or some other entity. You have to have their sign off to change facilities. Um, but I'm guessing that the another trade-off or another thing that has to be weighed in the balance is if something bad is happening and you become a little bit of a whistleblower, families, I'm guessing, would become concerned that there might be some sort of retaliation. It might be subtle, it might not be real obvious, but you got to worry about leaving your vulnerable family member someplace where you've started to complain about the care.
Absolutely. It's a legitimate concern, and it's something that a lot of people deal with in that context. But again, the facilities have a legal obligation to live up to in that context. And just because the resident is not happy with the care doesn't mean that the resident, should have be retaliated against, or there should be some retribution. They have to look at it and say, why is this person complaining about this? Is this really a legitimate complaint? Or is it just because of whatever other reason? But that analysis oftentimes is not done. And like you said, they look at it as, oh, wait, you just need to stop complaining and just let us do our job.
Right. Yeah. Well, and there are agencies to which the patients and their families can turn before they turn to somebody like you. For example, Adult Protective Services, and maybe the Ombudsman. Do you want to talk about the Ombudsman services?
Correct. You can contact Adult Protective Services or the Ombudsman, and a lot of times the Adult Protective Services then send the complaint to the Ombudsman to investigate. But there's also a portal for the California Department of Public Health where you can file a complaint against the particular facility if you feel necessary, that's necessary. There are those things. Unfortunately, because these are all state agencies, they are so overburdened that it's difficult for action to be taken. And it's rare that a facility really pays the price for what's occurring inside that facility because of what's a state agency or a local agency is doing. And and all those people should be commended for the job that they're doing, but it's a difficult job and they're very overburdened. There is a nonprofit called California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform out there as well that has a tremendous amount of resources. So if anybody's concerned, that's a great website for questions that can help you at least find the right direction to go.
Yeah, I am glad you brought that up because I would echo your fondness for CAN, or California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform. And just for anybody who's listening out there, the Ombudsman in Contra Costa County and also Alameda and Solano is Empowered Aging if you're in need of their help. And it's their job to kind of address problems, make sure that all residents in facilities in their counties are receiving the kind of care that they are supposed to receive. But again, as Shahrad said, they have a big job and they are not always able to do everything they would like to. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
There's one other point in terms of the family being involved. Oftentimes you have an elderly person, right? The person from the Adult Protective Services shows up. I just actually read a report a few months ago that had this. And the elderly person said, no, it's okay. I'm okay. And she's trying to be very nice about this, but she doesn't understand because she has cognitive issues. He doesn't understand or remember what happened, and she's telling the Adult Protective Services it's not a big deal, and they close the file. So that's why the family being involved and providing the supplemental information will help that investigation propel forward. So that's another consideration in terms of being proactively involved.
That is a good point. You can't necessarily take the person who's frail and possibly a little bit cognitively compromised. You can't just take your cues from them. Correct. In every case. So when a case escalates to the point where you have become involved, talk about how that is how is it to prove? How is it for the family?
These are not easy cases, unfortunately, despite the protected class that these individuals are in. We have a lot of different challenges that we have to overcome. One of the biggest ones is the facilities coming in, and when you're being admitted, having the resident or a loved one who has power of attorney sign an arbitration agreement. So one thing to keep in mind is do not sign that arbitration agreement. You're not required to. They can't force you as a condition of admission to sign an arbitration agreement. That once that arbitration agreement is signed, then they will fight us. Even on borderline, there are firms that will file a petition to compel arbitration on every case, even if it's borderline. We have cases that one that already went up on appeal, we won and it came back, and now we're going to have a trial in front of a jury, and another one that's on appeal right now with those circumstances where there are even questionable ones where we can't even identify that this is the resident's signature on this document, and they're pushing us into arbitration. And that tells you that they see that as a great advantage because under the elder abuse statute, if we prevail, which is a higher standard, it's a clear and convincing standard as opposed to a preponderance in civil cases, which is an easier standard to meet. If you prevail on the elder abuse cause of action, then we're entitled to recover attorney's fees from the other side. So there are things that come into play, but ultimately not signing the arbitration agreement, being proactive, being an advocate for your loved one, asking a lot of questions. And last but not least, based on what I've seen, and we all have family members who are getting older, and I have a lot of friends who have family who are in facilities. Having the smaller facilities tend to result in better care for the individuals that are in them, as opposed to being in an 85-bed facility where you're a number on a spreadsheet.
All right. Very, very, very good advice. And I echo what you said about the smaller facilities, just based on client input, things that I've picked up over the years of working with many, many clients and family members with clients in various facilities. The smaller ones seem to have more capacity to give good care. But again, it's usually not the individual caregivers. They're doing their best. It's just that they might be in a very difficult situation and not able to give the care they would like to give. Shahrad, I'm going to now go to our questions and see what we've got from our viewers. Those of you who are not watching us on the live stream but are watching the video or listening to a podcast, an audio, you don't get to ask questions, but we do get audience questions, so I'm scrolling through to make sure I don't miss any. Okay, so let's see, I have here, give me a second. Okay. Oh, that's a good question. Isn't the fact that a patient has a bed sore sufficient proof of neglect? Isn't that per se neglect? We wouldn't have bed sores if things were going right.
It's complicated in the sense that the defense will bring in experts to say, well, look, it's not something that's unavoidable. It's what did we do to reduce the opportunity for that? And then we look at the record keeping and say, all right, this person's, let's say, 75 or 80 years old, they're bed bound, and you're required to turn them every 2 hours and do skin checks. Was that done? Oh, absolutely. We do that all the time. Okay, so how was that done? Where is the documentation? And what's important is when we initially evaluate the case, we look at every piece of paper that we can get from the facility and other medical records. And what's missing is just as important as what's there. So oftentimes you'll find that there is a person that's in there and they develop a bed sore. And then we say, all right, were they turned every 2 hours? And there's no record of it. And the facility will say, well, we have a process where the nurses or the caregivers go through and turn everybody at the same time every 2 hours. Well, how do you confirm that? Well, the director of nursing confirms it. Great. She must have a log then that says every 2 hours I walked through and everybody was turned. Oh, no, we don't have that. So it's a matter of asking questions and drilling down past the surface of don't worry about it, it's okay, that then reveals the true practices that go on, where if that one nurse or one caregiver has 30 patients, it's impossible for them to, help feed, provide medication, and turn those people within a 2-hour period. And it's not that he or she's a horrible person. It's that it's not humanly possible for anybody to do that thing. And it's the facility's responsibility to not put that caregiver in that situation.
Yeah, I think that your overarching advice, which includes the family has to be on it, the family has to be paying attention, and the family has to maybe think a little bit like you ask the question, is she getting turned? And if the answer you get is, oh yeah, of course, then the next question has to be asked, how do I know that? Show me where you've written down in the log that she's actually getting turned. So that's good. Okay. I have another here. What kind of remedies can you get for a nursing home abuse case? For example, emotional distress, pain and suffering. This sounds like it must be written by a lawyer. What kind of compensation do the people get, or remedies do they get if you win?
So there are emotional distress damages that can be recovered. There's attorney's fees. You can get punitive damages. So there's a whole host of things depending on the facts that you can build into your case. So there's stuff we look at in terms of the facility's finances. How much money are they taking in? How much money is being paid out? Oftentimes, we find that there's a facility at the bottom and then two other entities above it. One of them owns the land and the building. The other one is the management company. All the money gets paid out through really high rents and exorbitant fees to the management and the building owner. And then the facility says, we don't make any money. Medicare and Medicaid, please provide us with additional funds, which is taxpayer money that's coming into the facilities. So ultimately, what we're looking at is accountability. And at the end of the day, this is somewhat of a passion project for me because I feel like I'm being the voice of people who are elderly and disabled and they can't stand up for themselves. And for me, there's plenty of other work out there, and I would like nothing more than this particular line of work to disappear. But unfortunately, that's not the case.
Yeah. This is the kind of work that you wish would not be needed. Yeah.
Right.
Well, who knows? Someday in the far distant future, we can keep chipping away at it. All right. Shahrad, I just want to thank you so much for being here. All of the things you told us about what families can do and what they should watch out for is so important. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I really appreciate the invite and being here. And I also want to thank you for, helping the clients that I referred to you that needed estate planning advice. You and your team do an amazing job. And I really appreciate everything you've done for the clients that we've worked together on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you all listeners for being here today. I hope you got a lot out of that. I certainly did. It's eye-opening sometimes to hear about the things that happen. And I hope you'll catch up with us next time. I look forward to connecting with you then.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Absolute Trust Talk Live. If you enjoyed listening in, then don't forget to subscribe. You can find us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you may listen by searching Absolute Trust Talk. While you're there, we would also love for you to leave us a review. And then why not share your favorite episodes with family, friends, or colleagues too? You can find all of our shows and corresponding show notes by visiting absolutetrustcouncil.com. You'll also find a variety of other free resources, including our ebooks, videos, blogs, presentations, and more. If you need help with your estate planning or administration, we also offer a free discovery call to help get the process started. You can find more information on booking your session by visiting absolutetrustcouncil.com/scheduling. Don't forget to keep an eye out for our next live episode in 2 weeks. If you join us for the broadcast, you can submit questions during the show. But if not, don't worry. You can always get in touch with us by sending a quick message to info@absolutetrustcounsel.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you soon.